In this lecture, we're going to cover fractures and disorders that affect the skeletal system. So first we'll talk about some inflammatory conditions associated with joints, because this is something that in fact impacts a lot of people. Bursitis is the inflammation of the bursa, which remember surround joints, but are not directly involved in the joint. These are usually caused by a blow or by friction. Tendinitis is the inflammation of the tendon sheaths around joints. Arthritis is an inflammatory or degenerative disease of joints, and there are many types of arthritis, in fact over 100, and it's the most widespread crippling disease in the United States. Osteoarthritis is the most common chronic type of arthritis. It's probably related to the normal aging process. It's present in more than one species. Other animals also get arthritis. So osteoarthritis is just a very common mammalian condition. Rheumatoid arthritis is actually an autoimmune disease. So it's when the immune system attacks the joints. Symptoms begin with bilateral inflammation of certain joints, and rheumatoid arthritis, as it progresses, can often lead to deformities. Gouty arthritis, or gout, is inflammation of joints, but it's caused by a deposition of urate crystals that come from the blood. Gout can usually be controlled with the diet. Bones can also be broken, so those are all called fractures. Any break in the bone is considered a fracture. There are closed or simple fractures. These are breaks that do not penetrate the skin, meaning that it's not visible from the outside. An open or a compound fracture is when the broken bone penetrates through the skin. So this is when it tears the skin and you can see potentially like the end of a broken bone. Bone fractures are treated by reduction and immobilization. So you essentially realign the bone and then immobilize it until it can heal. There are two different types of reduction that occur when you are going to treat a break. And so a closed reduction is when the bone is set by a physician. So if you have a fairly uncomplicated fracture, this is what's happened, and then you can put a cast on. If you have an open reduction, this is when surgery is performed and the bones are set in place by pins or wires instead of just a plaster cast. There's a bunch of different types of fractures, so we'll go through those first, or right now. So a comminuted fracture is when the bone breaks into many fragments. These are more common in the elderly because their bones are more brittle, often the result of accidents and falls and things like that. And if you have many fragments, oftentimes you need to have pins and wires put in to heal the bones in the right position. A compression fracture is when the bone is crushed. These are most common in porous bone or spongy bone. Car accidents can make these things happen. In this x-ray you can see the body of the vertebrae here has been crushed, and so that would be a compression fracture. A depressed fracture is when the bone is pressed inward, so this is very common in skull fractures. In this x-ray you can see right here where the bone was pressed inward on the skull. An impacted fracture is when the broken ends of the bone are forced into each other. So this is really common if you try to catch yourself when you fall by outstretching your hand, because you can get compression fractures in the radius or the ulnar. So you can see here, there's a bone that has been kind of broken and then pushed into itself. A spiral fracture occurs when excessive twisting is applied to the bone. This is a common sports injury, like if you do a plant and spin, but your cleats don't move and your bone breaks instead of something else. This x-ray is actually a femur with a spiral fracture. I don't even know how a person could possibly spiral fracture a bone of that size, but it happened because here's the x-ray. I know it's the femur because you can see the patella sitting over here. Green stick fractures are really common in children because they have more flexible bones, and it's when the bone breaks incompletely. So here you can see the bone is still intact on this side of the bone, but you can see that it's broken on this side of the bone, kind of the way a green twig breaks when you try to bend it in half. But because the wood is wet and pliable, it only breaks on half of the twig. This table just reviews the different types of fractures. You can feel free to use that as a resource when you're working on the fractures lab that you're going to be working on later this week. And next we're going to talk about how fractures heal. So when a bone breaks, the blood vessels that are in the bone rupture. No surprise. You break blood vessels when you damage tissue. So the first thing that happens is that a hematoma forms. A hematoma is essentially just a blood-filled swelling. And the bone cells that are in the area, if they're deprived of nutrients, will end up dying. So the first thing that happens when a bone breaks is that the hematoma formation occurs. Then the break is splinted by a fibrocartilage, and that's going to form what's called a callus. New capillaries can grow, and the dead tissue that's there is going to be disposed of by phagocytes. So those are cells that work with the immune system, and they can eat and digest dead cells and any other like cellular structures that are loose. And then the fibrocartilage callus can form a splint. So here you can see the fibrocartilage callus formation. There's these fibers that are shown in yellow that are the cartilage that's starting to regrow, and then this can also start to revascularize, and blood will start to serve the area to feed the newly growing tissue. Once the fibrocartilage callus is there, it's replaced by a bony callus. This occurs as osteoblasts and osteoclasts migrate to the area. They can start to multiply, and remember, osteoblasts add bone, osteoclasts destroy bone. So here you can see the bony callus is kind of this yellowish tissue that is starting to form. It'll start as spongy bone, and then compact bone can be formed later by the action of the osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Then the bony callus can be remodeled by the osteoblasts and osteoclasts to form a permanent patch. So then you have a fully healed bone. So once the bone is fully healed, you can see where the break used to be, but it's been replaced with compact bone. Internally, it would be spongy bone, and it's as strong or stronger than how it was before if it heals correctly. For a simple fracture, healing takes 6 to 8 weeks for bone. It will take longer, though, if you break really large bones or if you have a break in the elderly because they have poorer circulation, so it doesn't get as much nutrients, and so it heals a little more slowly. Or it can also take longer to heal if there's many breaks and the bone has had to be pinned and plated and wired together.